Everything that I have to say on the topic today really stems from my experience working on two editorial projects and then typesetting one edition that isn't mine. And the two projects relevant here are the edition of Stephen Langton's Questione Filologia and Robert Courson's Summa Tota Celestis Philosophia. Both of these projects are, well, these are scholastic treatises, and this is really not, a lot of what I have to say is not really relevant to wider medieval studies, specifically to studies of scholasticism. I would guess that it will be applicable beyond this field in some specific areas, but more on this in a minute. And the first edition, Stephen Langton's Questiones, this is a very long-standing editorial project, currently nearing its completion. Ricardo Quinto published his first really important work, really milestone for Stephen Langton on this collection 30 years ago, exactly 30 years ago. And the first volume of the edition was published 10 years ago, and now we're missing only the last two volumes, and we're kind of seeing the end, so it's very close. But this edition is just a traditional printed edition, no digital form at all. Edition of Robert of Courson's Summa is at a very different stage. This is just the initial phase of working on this edition. Professor Gary Macy from Oregon, University of Oregon, and I are doing this work. And from the beginning, we wanted that this edition to be published in open access. And then, other than that, we knew that we would like to go in some digital form of representation, but we didn't really know what exactly. So to start, let me just put out the structure that we would like Courson's edition to stick to, and then just a few points on that. So basically, these are three interrelated layers. The first one, just digital facsimilia. Not much to say here, really, because all the work is done by libraries that provide us with IIIF manifests or something that we can use in similar form. Then we're just preparing a traditional printable publication, this open access form. This is just a PDF, so again, this is just a static, stable format. And then we want to provide a machine-readable version. This, of course, what TI-XML serves. It serves this purpose. But then we don't really plan to provide any extensive markup beyond what a capable reader will find already in the traditional printable publication. So the goal is not semantic extension, the goal is just really the machine-readable part. And that's it, right? That's all we're doing. Notably, no integration in form of any web application, no search tools, and really limited commentary on our part, other than, of course, the introduction to the printable and ideally printed publication. So I guess that this is likely very unexciting to mention in this room, such a prospect, because, well, this is, of course, not the DSE that we're supposed to be doing. And in this presentation, I would like to argue that this is actually a pretty exciting model for the field, specifically for scholastic studies, and that there are some gains, generally DH gains, to gather from this. So I guess that many of you are familiar with Patrick Zala's distinction between digital and digitized, where the digital is actually the DSE or any other digital publication that actually embraces the potential of the medium, while the digitized is something that, well, can be published as a digital-born product, but essentially is just something that is printable, or perhaps even printed, but moved into the digital medium. So we're very much at the digitized end of the DSE spectrum here. Now, what problem this could potentially be solving? So something that many authors writing about methodologies of digital scholarly editing wrote extensively. Think Peter Robinson, think Elena Pierazzo. In context closer to this presentation, Franz Fischer, is that there is a sort of vicious circle that the advancement of scholarly digital editing is stuck in. Because on the one hand, obviously, we lack digital editions of this material. Because we lack digital editions, we can't really show what we could be doing with them. We can't show convincingly the applications. And then majority of editors who are not already doing digital editions have no genuine incentive to go in the direction of this potentially risky and time-consuming, resources-consuming process of moving their work from printed medium that they know into digital that is scary. And then because they're not doing this, we still have no material where we could show the actual potential of the digital medium, and so it lasts. So one way in which a model like the one I described a minute ago could be a way to break with the cycle, specifically for scholastic studies, is that just plain text, not some elaborate apparatus, but just the plain text is enough to support some cases relevant for the field of computational analysis. And the two that instantly come to mind are the two on the slide here. So scholastic literature tends to be immensely intertextual, and mapping intertextuality automatically would be a great aid, both at micro level, when you're just editing and you really want to find a specific auctoritas. We would love to have a reliable way to search through vast corpora, to finally find this one auctoritas that we spent weeks and sometimes literally months looking for. Now, there are ways this could be done if only we had the machine-readable resources. The contextual word embeddings, for example, are doing really great work at locating paraphrased or otherwise distorted auctoritates. So that's one thing we could be doing. Then there is an entire project with just this goal being its ratio essendi. Jeffrey Witt's Scholastic Commentaries in Text Archive. This is essentially just a database of as much XML TI material as Witt was able to scrape and format as XML TI that's relevant to the scholastic tradition. And then he's providing Sparkle endpoint and just querying this for dense occurrences of word n-grams shared in different works. And this is a way that you can at scale, not just at this micro level, but at scale, locate patterns of text reuse, say in commentaries, in sentences, commentaries, spanning 2, 3, 4 centuries. So very exciting stuff there, and really potentially discipline revolutionizing. And the other thing you can do with just plain text is stylometric authorship attribution. So scholastic and generally medieval sources are oftentimes anonymous. And we have so many miscellaneous collections where everyone just gave up somewhere in the 1930s, 40s, and decided that we will never know who actually was the author. Perhaps just looking at word distributions, we could actually move beyond just the state of where we're stuck at the moment with this research. And then there are some more elaborate things. Langton's Questiones, this is a very rough tradition. Clearly there was a ton of editorial work that was going on before these collections entered circulation and was never really finished. And this means that we can kind of track the individual voices of reportatores or editors that are engaged in working, that were engaged in this editorial work. I'm saying kind of because there are some problems. These samples tend to be too short for standard stylometric methods, but that's the topic for a very different paper. Anyway, there are very promising lanes for these two use cases. And another reason to be excited about that sort of low-key, unassuming, barely digital edition is that it is gaining institutional support in form of Medieval Text Consortium. This is a project that was quite a few years in the making and is just about to publish its first publication. Walter Segrave Insolubles, edited by Barbara Bartocci and Stephen Reed. And this is the text that I recently typeset for them in LaTeX. So the focus of this project, the Medieval Text Consortium, is exclusively an open access, or at least was exclusively an open access at first. Sorry, I just have to grab something. Okay. So of what I described in the first place, speaking about the Courson's edition, of these 3 layers, they really were aiming only for the PDFs distributed in open access, and this is possible because all of the infrastructure comes from open book publishers. This project is just a series affiliated with the OBP. And then on top of that, when IIIF manifests are available, it is very easy to add to a traditional edition just layer of facsimile. You can just turn every marker of pagination into link to IIIF to images available for IIIF manifest. So you have these 2 layers pretty easily. Now, they did not in the first place intend to provide any machine-readable resources at all, but one of the things that make me excited about this project is that they are using LaTeX. And because they're using LaTeX, it actually is not that far from their files to some XML representation, because XML and TeX can be convertible in some cases. So, of course, if one were to do this by the book, you go from XML, which is a semantically rich format, to TeX that centers on presentation. And potentially, TeX, because it is meant to, to produce PDFs that will be then read by human readers, can flatten some hierarchies that are stored in your XML file and just render them no longer machine readable, or just not render them at all. So basically, this is a direction of loss of information. But this is only the case if there was some rich structure in your XML in the first place. So if what we aim for is this very low complexity XML file, where basically what you see on a page is what you get in your XML file, this is just readable not just for you, but for your machine as well, then actually the convertibility is kind of there. And there are already examples of projects that went from LaTeX to XML and not the other way around. So I'll focus on just one aspect of the problem, because of course when one gets into minutiae of TI schemas, it goes exponential, the explanation, pretty quickly. But distance between TeX and XML, of course, depends on the exact schema, so just the exact markup that you want to add to your document. And one way you could, oh, sorry, I didn't end this sentence. The detail I'd like to focus on is how critical apparatus is encoded in these, can be encoded in your schema. So the project that went from LaTeX to XML, that I mentioned before, is Katarzyna Anna Kapitan's Icelandic saga. I'll not try to read it out. and I can't really follow whatever the language is there. But I just see that it seems to be the case that apparatus is just encoded. The way you would shape your apparatus entry in printed edition, just pasting it in the correct TI element. And of course, this is not the TI-ish way to do this, but this is a very simple way to do this. This is simple enough that you can just transform your LaTeX file procedurally into an XML that, yes, will have very flat structure when it comes to your apparatus, but it still will be there, recognizable as apparatus for your machine. So another project I mentioned before that focuses on scholastic literature and provides TI XML files is this Lombard Press, the initiative developed by Jeffrey Wheat. And in his schema, he actually has a more elaborate way to encode apparatus, where with each entry of apparatus, you have to decide what sort of variant this is. Is it an omission? Is it a variant reading? Is it your correction? You have to specify that there are, I think, 15 different types of critical nodes. And if one would like to enter these very basic XML files into the digital environment created for this text reuse project of Jeffrey Wheat into Lombard Press, it is necessary to add these annotations. And one of the ways to do this, one could of course just do this by hand, terrible prospect, but it actually turns out that large language models are quite good at this, well, semantic enrichment, but it's not really enriching much. Because when you imagine how a human reader would do this, in almost all of the cases you would not need to go back to manuscript sources. You can infer the type of the node from just what you see on a printed page. And this is something that at times is benign, like you can easily, every OM dot, you know that's an omission. You could just do this procedurally. In some cases, it requires some semantic comprehension, when, for example, you have to know if this is a grammatic variant or just an alternative lexion. But this is the sort of inference, very low-level inference, and semantic comprehension that these models prove to have. I tested this with GPT-4o. In the first run, what I did, I just took a file from Jeffrey Wheat's repository. I erased some classifications and asked GPT to classify it after I fed it the schema, description of schema, just one by one from Wheat's site. It wasn't fabulous. It was like around 70% correctness. But then when I looked at the exact errors it was doing, these were systematic. And I clearly just didn't prompt it well enough to remember that this is a Latin text. It was just not really looking into Latin semantics that it can comprehend. So that's a pretty promising lane. And now, risking to be repetitive, let me once again note that I think really LaTeX is in a unique position to advance for this specific field, digital scholarly editions of our sources. Why it is so? There's a ton of projects that move into LaTeX even though they have no digital ambitions at all. This is just because we have ReledMac and ReledPal packages, which are fabulous for typesetting critical apparatus and for parallel typesetting, two very demanding typesetting tasks that LaTeX handles very well, thanks to Maël Roquette, who's maintaining these two packages. Because we have that, many projects find out that even if you're thinking about printed edition only, it is just a very efficient for your workflow to move into using LaTeX. And this is not to look far. For example, this is exactly the story of Stephen Langton's project. After the first volume of the edition 10 years ago, I was not working on it at the time, was sent to the publishers, was proofread there, was sent, of course, in just in Word files. And then all of the typesetting happened with two different files, as is standard in this case. One for the core edition and a separate file for the apparatus. The amount of errors that finds its way into texts that have that sort of complex structure in them, and still we're just thinking about printed edition, the amount of errors meant that it was like a year-long process of proofreading. So then the project PI basically gave our publisher just an ultimatum. Either you're accepting our camera-ready PDFs, or we're not publishing with you, because it's just too much work. And there are so many projects that go through the cycle. So they just, while trying to prepare just a printed edition, they find out that LaTeX is the tool for them. And then they just go with what they already typeset on their own to a traditional publisher who's printing this edition, then how it exactly functions. All the different projects libraries buy the printed copies. First thing they do, they OCR it. They scan it and OCR it, and this is what people are really using, the OCR PDF. And it existed already, because the process went through LaTeX. It was produced in a better digital-born form. It was never intended to circulate as such. So I think that that's just a point where a project like Medieval Text Consortium can simply intercept a lot of added editorial value and make it actually available in the form that many want to be using it. Now, is that a DSE that we all dream of? No. But is it a selling point for all folks who are otherwise not interested in DSEs at all? Yes, absolutely. So what happens when these texts are typeset with LaTeX is that the structuring that we require from an XML file is already happening. And again, as long as the structure is meant to be kept simple, you can just go from this to an XML file. You can go from this to a plain text, obviously. And there are use cases where that's really helpful for you. That's something that will be really hard to extract from the files if what will be published in the end will be only the open access version, the PDF. So that's one point. And another one is that there is a paradox to the way LaTeX functions in wider digital environment. So LaTeX was, of course, created almost 50 years ago to introduce high-quality, artisanal-grade typography into digital print. Now, the reason it is still used is really that whenever you have some old data that's already structured, you can very easily produce procedurally a representation of that text that will be human readable. Now, LaTeX still has this capability of allowing you to really polish the text, but many digital projects that employ LaTeX in some form do this only to produce this barely readable, kind of readable, maybe barely readable is too much, but not really polished text, something that a traditional publisher would not decide to already publish. Like they would really do some manual work on the file. This is something that we could be doing. Like we don't have to sacrifice this really high quality typesetting when we move into our DSEs. Most of the time we're not doing this because, well, we have some other form of representation that we think as the correct one for our texts. But there are so many users that just want to get the PDF of our file and be done with our edition. Like this is what they're looking for. We can give it to them. We can create a user base that will know where they can find our editions. I think that this is one of the really exciting prospects behind Medieval Text Consortium. What are the few key points? So workflows over software, distributed expertise, institutional support of this expertise over tools. There are many of the scholars who wrote and still are writing about this vicious circle of DSEs point out to preparation of better, more ergonomic tools as the solution to the problem. This is a very good point to make, but also we kind of lack the scholarly audience that would like to use the products we're producing. We, on the other hand, at least we're thinking about scholastic studies, study of the scholastic tradition. There is a ton of folks who just really would love to get their hands on these PDFs. I'm just finishing. I think that a project like Medieval Text Consortium is exciting because basically what it does, it creates a support network for someone who is interested in open access, knows nothing about digital technologies, can bring their files in whatever format is convenient for them, can leave the project with exactly the same digital literacy that they had in the first place, but the text will function there will be a machine-readable version of the text. That's basically the point. Now, for all of that to genuinely function as this distributed network that can, in which this text can circulate, it is of course of paramount significance that any licenses under which this text is published is open. All of that is possible just because Open Book Publishers is providing the infrastructure. All of that is possible for Open Book Publishers to provide because they have a different financial model. For me, as for so many scholars, it is way more exciting and interesting to think about UI, UX problems, designing layouts, and so on. But really, the financial model of traditional publishers is something that doesn't make it just it explicitly makes it impossible for them to move in this direction. If a project like this, of course, large institutions have their inertia. If a project like this would work out, then this is a sort of pressure notch for larger publishers to also genuinely move in this direction of actually embracing open access. Also for editorial, editions of sources. This is, of course, something that's happening for journals, not really happening for that sort of editorial publications. And finally, it seems to be the case that as long as you have schemas that are not really compatible with one another, but it is just some sort of minutiae that that perhaps you can't really just procedurally move from one format to another, from one type of encoding, from one element in TI to another used in a different edition for a similar task. It turns out that these LLMs are pretty good at that sort of translation. As long as this is not a really huge semantic enrichment that you're expecting from the model, as long as this is something that you might infer really easily, and with being really secure about what you're doing with the XML on your own, it is at least worth giving the LLMs a try. Yeah, and I think that's basically it for my piece. Thank you very much.